So I want to read you a letter. It's not very long. And it's called A Letter to a Junior Designer. I admit it, you intimidate me. Your work is vivid and imaginative, far superior to my woeful scratchings at a similar age. The things I struggled to learn barely make you sweat, and one day you'll be a better designer than me. But for now, I can cling to my sole advantage, the one thing that makes me more valuable. I get results. I can put a dent in cast-iron CEO arguments. I can spot risks and complications months in advance, and in the wager that is design, I usually bet on the right color. People trust me with their stake. So if you'll humor me, maybe I can offer a few suggestions to speed you toward the inevitable. First, slow down. You're damn talented, but in your eagerness to prove it, you sometimes rush toward a solution. You pluck an idea from the branch and throw it onto the plate before it has time to ripen. Don't mistake speed for precocity. The world doesn't need wrong answers in record time. Perhaps your teachers exalted the idea as the gem of creative work and taught you that the idea is the hard part. We have the rare luxury in our professional diligence often equates to playfulness. To do our job properly, we must disassemble our promising ideas and make them into something better. The process feels mechanical and awkward initially. In time, the distinction between idea and iteration will blur, and eventually the two become one. So go deeper. Squander loose time on expanding your ideas, and even if you're sure you're perfect or useless, look closely at decisions you think are trivial. I guarantee you'll find better solutions around the corner. Think it through. We'd love to believe design speaks for itself, but a large part of the job is helping others hear its voice. Persuasive rationale, the why to your work, is what turns a great document into a great product. If you haven't already, sometime in your career, you're going to meet an awkward son of a bitch who wants to know why every pixel is where you put it. Why that color? Why this line? What does it do? Well, it defines, it distinguishes. But why here? Why that color? Why that thickness? It looks better won't suffice. You'll need rationale that explains hierarchy, balance, gestalt. In other words, esoteric ways to say it looks better. But ways that reassure stakeholders that you can understand the foundations of their craft. And similarly, be sure you can explain which alternatives you rejected and why. Working this through will also help you see if you've been diligent or if you've been clinging to a pet idea. This might sound political. It is. Politics is just the complex art of navigating teams and people. And the more senior you get, the more time you'll spend with people. Temper your passion. Your words matter. Be careful not to get carried away. Passion is useful, but you'll be more effective when you demonstrate the evidence behind your beliefs rather than the strength of those beliefs. Softer language earns fewer retweets, but better results. If you have a hunch, call it a hunch. It shows honesty. It leaves you headroom to be unequivocal about the things you are sure of. Similarly, your approach to your work will change. Right now, design is an ache. You see all the brokenness in the world. Stupid products, trivial mistakes, bad designs propped up with scribbled corrections, and that stupidity never goes away. But in time, you learn how to live with it. What matters is your ability to change things. Anyone can complain about the world, but only a few can fix it. That fury, that energy fades with time until the question becomes one of choosing which battles to arm yourself for and which to surrender. Often this means gravitating towards the biggest problems as you progress in your field. Your attention may turn from tools and techniques to values and ethics. The history of the industry is instructive. Give it proper attention. After all our futures shrink with time until the past becomes all we have. You'll come to appreciate that it can be better to help others reach the right outcomes themselves than to do it yourself. That, of course, is what we call leadership. Finally, there may come a point when you realize you're better served by thinking less about design. Work and life should always be partially separate. So there's no doubt that the experiences you have in your life shape your work too. Please remember to be broad. Be a wise human being. Travel thoughtfully. So much as you can, and read literature. A good novel will sometimes teach you more than another design book can. Remind yourself that the sea exists. You'll notice the empathy, sensitivity, cunning, and understanding you develop make your working life better too. But you're smart, and of course you'll realize this is really a letter to a younger me. And alongside, it's a lament at my nagging sense of obsolescence, the angst of a few gray hairs and the emerging trends I don't quite understand, which is mildly ridiculous at my age. But this is a mildly ridiculous industry, and you'll inherit it all in good time. Good luck. Kenneth Bowles is a favorite of mine. He's a designer, speaker, and author, and I think some of you may know him. But when he published this letter on a list apart, I thought it was one of the most thoughtful expressions of caring advice that I ever heard. So while you're thinking about that, change gears with me for a couple of minutes. In 1963, when President Kennedy was coming to Dallas, the Morning News planned to run a map of the motorcade route in the paper. The young creative director at the time suggested that that not be done. He was ignored, and the map was in the paper the next day. Later, on November 22nd, that creative director walked out of a storage room in the Dallas School Book Depository, where the News had some offices back then, and a stranger walked past him and took up a position where he could see the parade route. From the window in that room, he shot the President of the United States, and he put Dallas on the map in the most horrific way possible. The creative director was investigated by the FBI and found to have no part in the shooting. Lost my spot there. But the events leading up to that day were a turning point in history, and a history that might have played out a whole lot differently. The name of the young man who left the room moments before was Max Wallace. And in the 50s and 60s, he was the director of art and photography at the Dallas Morning News, and he later was the creative director at the Zales Corporation. One of his loves was teaching. And although he had a degree, he had a teaching certificate, he was perfectly qualified to teach in university, he chose instead to create an agency, a small agency, and he hired guys like me. And I was fortunate enough to be a student of his for 2 years. So if I were talking to the younger me, it would be this guy, a whole lot less of me there, and a whole lot more hair. But I started working at this agency for this remarkable guy. It was sort of an apprenticeship. And from Max, I learned about mechanical drawing, typesetting, print production, photography. There were no computers involved then. And I also learned about business development. I learned about account management. I learned about relationships and how to develop and maintain them. So my father was in advertising and in PR when I was growing up. And I remember some of the people that he used to work around, and what we now call madmen. But they weren't like Don Draper, and they weren't like David Ogilvy. They were loud, and they smelled of hair cream, and they smoked cigarettes. And they were always kind of frantic, and their suits never quite fit well. Those are the people that shaped what I thought of when I thought of an ad guy. Well, Max was neither Don Draper, nor was he like anyone I ever knew in advertising. This was basically my desk in 1982, and good Lord knows I cost this man money in the form of wasted materials, blown film, and a lot of time. He'd show me how to do something once. He would lead me to it. I'd bring him the product at my work, and he would speak in this very slow way that always sounded like he was slightly amused as he told me what I'd done wrong and how I could fix it, and then he would simply say, okay, go do it again. I couldn't have a better mentor. And I also learned to play darts, thanks to Max. There were two of us in the art department, and we sat on desks about this far apart, and we liked to take our X-Acto knives and throw them on the other guy's desk. I don't know why, but we liked this. There was a very satisfying thump and a fa-na-na-na-na-na-na when it stuck, and we thought that was great. The only problem is we kept breaking the points off our X-Acto knives. And we were going through blades at an unusual rate. And while I didn't think I mentioned this about Max, Max was cheap. And so one day, Max came in with a cheap dartboard and cheap darts and the rules of a game called cricket that he had Xeroxed out of the Encyclopedia Britannica. And he said that when the blades were getting expensive, the next time we felt like throwing knives at each other, just to get up and play a game of darts. So we got pretty good at it. And if we were going to throw sharp things around the art room, nobody was particularly injured, and it didn't cost us money and supplies. But the most important thing about that dartboard are the ideas that grew around it. So preparing to speak to an international audience about design is kind of a daunting thing. I'm a strategist now. I get asked to look into the future a lot and offer my thoughts on what it holds for different platforms and technologies. And I don't want to sound like the guy who has it all worked out. So while I prepared this talk, I came across something online that reminded me of Max and my teacher. And all these stories came flooding back to me. And as they did, the things I learned from him came back too. Actually, they never left. But for the first time, I could trace the history of my career in design back through him and see how through the years his influence has been with me all this time. Even though he taught me about very specific types of design, the term designer has come to encompass much more, that we have so many universal things in common. I had a chance to learn from someone unlike anyone I ever met before or since, and I want to share a little bit of that with you today. Did you hear that? One of our accounts was a cookie shop, and we did print ads for magazines, we did newspaper, radio spots, and occasionally they would do a live event, and we would support those by shooting the event. And Max always made sure that we never carried less than 3 cameras. So one might be loaded with a color film, one with a black and white, one with a faster or a slower film, depending on the light that was available and where we were going to be. This way, all we had to do was aim, focus, and shoot, which even now sounds pretty archaic. But that's what we did to eliminate steps so that we stood a better chance of catching a moment. So plan ahead. Check your gear. Do you have all your supplies? Are they ready for use? Do you keep supplies in reserve? Can you predict what will happen all the time? No, of course you can't. But the experience will tell you what to pack. Your experience will tell you what to pack. And also when you're done, someone else will have to take what you do and they'll have to make something from it, whether it's a printer, a machinist, a software developer. If you haven't thought through the details, you're going to be asked about them. And either everything stops, or worse yet, you're not going to be asked at all, and you'll get a surprise coming off the end of the printing press. So plan ahead, because you may have to live with the results if you don't. Max told me a story once. When he took over the art and photography department at the News, the photographers used to run out, shoot up a bunch of film, and they'd bring it all back and dump it off in the art department. And if it looked like crap, they would send it in for airbrushing and clean things up. Well, Max made the art department off limits to the photogs. And a lot of really bad photos had to run in the paper before people got the message. So if they didn't plan and they didn't take what they did seriously, that crappy print showed up in the paper. And several did before they understood. So plan ahead. This may sound a little harsh, but stick with me here. If you want to sign your art at the bottom, go find a coffee shop and show your work. This is advertising. The client does not give 2 shits about your portfolio. I live with phrases like, I'll know it when I see it. You've heard that one, right? My other favorite is, oh, that's great. What else have you got? I would spend hours going through pages of layout pads and sketches for the client, mechanicals, detailed layout, until they saw what they wanted. And then I lived with this crap, and I still do sometimes. But finally, at some point, it would strike the right chord, and they would parade around with my work and show everybody what they had designed. So to a young designer, that was pretty soul-crushing, because I not only killed myself to reach that point, but I lost my own point of view somewhere along the way, and I was just taking orders. I was told to shut up and color. Today, it's a combination of the audience and the business needs, and the businesses are discovering that great experience is good business. But you as a designer have to find the balance. This may sound paradoxical, but the less I'm married to an idea, the better I am at defending it. I can be more objective, and to paraphrase Kenneth, put evidence behind my opinion rather than force it. In other words, it wasn't about me. You have to take your ego out of it. So unhandcuff yourself. Practice. When you love a craft and practice a craft, there's no downtime. Get your sketchbook out. Go burn up some film. Spend some time experimenting in the darkroom. Write some code. Draw on the whiteboard. Whether it's music, sports, or any creative effort, practice puts certain tasks in the back of your mind so that you don't have to think about them deliberately, and it gives your head room to really be experimental and creative. In 1902, a young American engineer named Willis Carrier was waiting for a train. And while he was watching the fog roll across the platform, he had this sudden idea that fog is the condensation that occurs when air is rapidly cooled. In that instant, he had the idea for what would become the condenser, the air condenser. This is considered one of the few eureka moments in the whole history of innovation, and they come very seldom. But if you think about it, he was an engineer. He had an education. He became one through practice. Otherwise, how would he even think to have the notion, by looking at fog, to think of something like an air condenser? So maybe it wasn't so spontaneous as it sounds. And I think his practice prepared him to capture that idea. Innovation is as much about discarded ideas as the energy it took to come up with them, as it is about one great idea. Max taught me to get your ideas out, look at them, toss them aside, keep going, but go back. You may think you have that golden idea, but take a look around a little bit, and maybe it is a golden idea. Somewhere in that pile of cast-offs may be one concept, but it still takes work to refine it. Innovation is about having the presence of mind to capture those concepts so that you can examine them later, so that you can break them down and poke holes in them, and maybe deliver on them. Innovation is another word for the creative process, and creativity deserves your energy and requires practice. I remember announcing to my father that I wanted to be an idea man. You would have thought I told him I wanted to be a lawyer for the mob. He totally came unhinged, and he went on to make it very clear that idea men were a dime a dozen when people who could bring an idea to reality were at a premium. He wanted to be sure that I took that to heart. Now, being 6 years old, my mind was kind of cluttered, but for some reason that one stuck. So another thing I remember when I was in art school is that we had to draw an apple. And it was sitting on a table in front of us, and that seems easy enough because we already know that an apple is kind of round and red. It's got a stem that sticks out the top. It's kind of pinched at the bottom. The only problem is that wasn't the apple on the table in front of me. That's the apple I carry around in my brain. So I really had to look at that apple with all the variations in color and texture and shape, and I learned the importance of taking information from what I truly saw, not what I already thought. Dealing with people is like that too. After a while, you have this idea about the marketing guy or the lady in finance or the software developers. But just like the apple, you really need to observe them. You need to meet them. You need to talk to them. You need to learn something about their sensibilities and find out what makes them different. What is their superpower? They might run true to stereotype, But give them the opportunity to break that before you put them in that bucket. Look at and really see what's in front of you. Now, most of the work I did back then took place on 10 by 13 sheets of crescent board or paste-up board, which is a thick board with one really bright side. And even for the time, prepping them the way we did was a little archaic. We had these big parent sheets, and we had to cut them down to size, and then we taped them down to our art boards, and we marked out registration points for whatever it was we were designing so that the pressman could line up the images later on. And everything we drew was done in a blue pencil because the camera doesn't pick that up. So I would draw out pages in this way, and because the cameras weren't picking up the blue, I had to build things up from the bottom. And so the blue is where it started, and then there was a level of draftsmanship that had to layer on to get to that final design, whether it included art or whether it included line drawings or whether it included photostats or photographs or anything along those lines. It might consist of, say if you ever look at a newspaper and you see how it's broken down in little dots, that's called a halftone. So we had to sometimes make those ourselves too and paste them all down. Hand-drawn lines, borders were done using zip tape or pens, rapidograph pens. There may be somebody here who remembers having to keep their rapidograph pens clean. But that's foundation work. And the reason that we did that foundation work back then was, I mentioned text. Okay. Today you can drop text into a document or a design and you can play around with the sizing and the leading and the kerning and all the good stuff and swap fonts out, just 5, 6, 7, 8, look at them. Back then it required a typesetting machine. This beast is called the CompuGraphic. And you can get some gauge of the size of it from the keyboard there. So you can imagine how big a person was sitting in front of that monster. The only UI on it was this one little red light that went by and showed you what you were typing, like a little sort of a Times Square crawling light. Using a kind of a negative that rolled on a drum, light was shot through the letters onto film, and that film rolled into a drum in the machine, and you had to run around over on the side of it and open it up and take the cassette out, which was about this big, and go in the darkroom and plug it into another machine where it pulled the film out and ran it through chemistry just like photographs, and then you got this big, long, really stinky, wet piece of paper with your type on it. And whatever formatting you tried to do, size of type, whatever, you had to have it right, because imagine going through that every single time you made a mistake. That got pasted down on my desk where I broke out the X-Acto knives with the fresh points because I wasn't playing darts with them anymore, and cut up the lines, sometimes individual words, sometimes individual letters. We had about 7 or 8 fonts to choose from, mostly Helvetica and Optima was what we used. But, let's see. But I used the blue pencil to create a sort of a scaffolding, and that would represent the sketches, and I'd paste the type onto the board. But I had to have a clear idea of the finished product in my mind before I could begin any of that work. Draftsmanship was absolutely required, so foundation was what I learned. This may sound a little obvious and a little broad, but patience is something that I learned from Max because of who he was. They say the best evangelist isn't the one who tells, but the one who acts and shows you in their own behavior. I never knew Max's politics. I never knew anything about his religion. But as long as I knew him, he never lost his temper with me, in spite of the fact that I had the attention span of a squirrel drinking Red Bull. His wife used to say that in 50 years she saw him lose his temper one time. And the reason she knew he was mad was because she saw his jaw tighten up. And believe me, when it came to making adults mad, I had a gift. I never saw his jaw tighten up. the reason for patience is because everybody doesn't care about the things you care about as much as you do. Try to understand where their passions and pain lie, because just about everything that motivates people boils down to two things: seeking pleasure, avoiding pain. So if you can feed one or make the other go away, you're going to gain trust. And people trusted Max because he always seemed to understand them. When an engineer knows you respect his ability to solve complex problems, when you can acknowledge that the brand manager is on the hook to deliver certain things, certain business results, and when a client knows you understand the goals they envision, and you can communicate how you'll help with those things, you're going to gain their trust. But without patience, you'll never even reach that understanding. With patience, you're going to earn trust and respect and willingness from others to support your ideas. So, my journey in and out of the design world has been kind of a patchwork of success and failure. But no matter where I found myself, Max always came to mind when I was faced with a challenge. And in a way, he remained my mentor. So you've heard the journey is the thing. It really is. If you pay attention, you're going to notice even now that you're surrounded by people who've been where you're going. Even if they don't have to be older than you. And maybe you'll have a great mentor. Maybe you had a great mentor. But you should, if you have the opportunity to get one, you should find one. And you might have to go look. But you all have access to information that wasn't as easy to find when I was younger. Find it. Read it. Listen to it. And even without direct guidance, you can still learn from the experience of others. So over the years, I lost touch with Max. And I tried to locate him from time to time, and I didn't have any luck until one day I found him online. I found his obituary. He passed away just a couple of months earlier. Sorry. I just sort of fell back in my chair when I saw the news, and I thought about how many years I felt like I'd squandered my time with him. I really felt that way for a long time. I felt like I must have disappointed him, that I could have learned more from him, that I could have done a better job for him. And then I realized something. All of those feelings were rooted back in the 80s. So I may have disappointed him in 1984, but now I think that it just took me longer to learn what he was teaching. And knowing Max, I think Max knew that all along. So if I could talk to a younger me, I would tell me this last lesson. In 1983, I was hanging out with models and other creatives, and I was running pretty hard in the Dallas nightlife. I didn't have to wait in line to get into good clubs, and I really thought I was right. I was an arrogant little shit. And I thought that I was there. And the truth is, I was years and miles away from anything anybody would really call success. And so here I am today. My family's not rich. My house needs work. Our relatives make us crazy, and the cat shits in the garage. But I have been married for 23 years to the love of my life. I have a daughter who has made me forget or care about what it was like not to be a dad. I work in a field that has one of the most welcoming professional communities, and I work in a place that drives me always to be better than I am at things I love, with people I respect who do amazing things from their hearts. And for those reasons, if the music stopped right now, I could say I was successful. But I'm still on the journey, and that's success too. So I roamed around a bit this afternoon. And if you were looking for some sort of comprehensive guide to something, I never planned to offer you that. And maybe I was just lucky. But I think if we're prepared when opportunities come along, we have a hand in making our own luck. I've learned many lessons over the years, and I have many more to learn. And I have had more teachers than I can count, and I still do. their supervisors and peers, their acquaintances and close friends. But Max was special, as was the time I spent under his guidance. The lessons didn't all take right away, and I have to remind myself to practice some of them, but as I re-examine them now, I suppose that they're as meaningful to a good life as they are to good design. And if it was luck then, I wish that luck to you. So thanks, Max.